Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on Cowboy Story, we ride the stories of the West campfire. Truths trailed us memories, saloon whispers. Gritty humans sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The flies found it first. A black knot swirling above the far fence, loud as a small engine in the heat. Elias Mercer drove his last cedar post into the hard pan at Cottonwood Bend and wiped grit from his brow with the back of his hand. He listened. Wind in the cottonwoods, the hush of evening, the steady tick inside his vest pocket. The flies kept worrying one place along the east line. He took his hat off so the light would not blind him and walked. His right thigh ached the way it did, before weather turned each step reminding him of things he preferred to forget. A Remington pulled at his belt, familiar weight against his hip. The dirt gave off the smell of iron and sun. She leaned on his fence as if the planks were the only thing holding her to the world. A young woman dress, worn and stiff with blood hair, the pale color of straw after harvest. Her face had the washed-out look of someone who had bled too long. She saw him and set her jaw as if bracing for a wave. "If you have mercy," she said, voice rasped raw, "make it quick." Eli stopped a few paces off. "You are hurt. Do not touch me." Her hand flickered to her boot. He saw the glint in the shape his mind knew at once. He raised both palms and let his weight settle on his heels. "You draw, I shoot," he said even and low. "You bleed out in the dust. Or we try something else." Her fingers trembled on the knife hilt, then slid away. She swayed and caught herself on the top rail. Sweat had carved pale tracks through the dirt on her neck. Up close, he could see the cuff marks cut into her wrists, swollen and raw. "Who put you out here?" he asked. She swallowed and winced. "They will be here," she whispered. "They always are." "Who?" Her eyes went dull for a second, then lit with a kind of stubbornness. Silas Kincaid. His right hand twitched before he could stop it. He curled it into a fist and let his breath out through his nose. "You know him. He owns everything." She blinked slow, or thinks he does. He stepped in and got an arm around her before she slid down. She weighed almost nothing, a bag of sticks and ragged cloth and heat. Her shoulder pressed against his forearm, and he felt a raised brand that did not belong on human skin. It was a letter simple as a cattle mark, the K reversed and ugly. "That is not my mark," he said. "Of course it is not." She tried to laugh and failed. "Please." He carried her across the yard. The pump squealed when he drew water cold from the earth, and he soaked a clean rag till it dripped. Inside his cabin, the air held smoke and lye and pine soap. He cleared the table with one sweep of his forearm, then changed his mind and took her to the bed instead. He did not like other people in that bed. He liked less the idea of her dying on the floorboards. He set a lamp and struck a match. Yellow light pooled small and steady. The watch in his vest ticked a calm heartbeat inside the room. He unbuckled his gun belt and set it on the chair within reach. Whiskey bottle needle gut thread, a tin of salve bandage strips cut from an old shirt. He washed his hands till the water in the basin went pink. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. Her eyes tracked the flame. "Clara Whitfield." "Elias Mercer," he said. "Eli." He cut away the worst of the dress where the fabric had stuck to blood. A long crease along her shoulder needed stitches. He worked fast and neat, his fingers remembering their old job before the rest of him did. She flinched once teeth set, and he paused long enough to pour a cap of whiskey into her mouth. "Small sips," he said. "Water after." She nodded. He saw the places a rope had lived for days. He saw finger bruises and a grip that had not minded how bone moved under skin. He found a shallow slice on her thigh that would not trouble her if it stayed clean. He turned her gently so he could see her back. The reversed K rode high on her shoulder blade, fresh enough to shine. Her breath hitched. "Do not look at it." "I have seen worse," he said. "It came out dry." "Not on people," she said. "Not often." He did not answer. He threaded the needle and set 3 tight sutures in the gash. His hands moved while the rest of him made a list. He could smell the iron in her blood, the sour of fear on her skin, the desert inside her mouth. He dabbed salve and wrapped clean cloth. When it was done, he slid a folded quilt under her head and a second under her knees to take the pull off the stitches. Her gaze kept catching on the vest pocket where the tick lived. "That sound," she said. "Watch," he said. He took it out and checked the time, though he knew it by light. "Helps me keep count." "Does it help the shaking?" she asked. His hand lay still against the sheet. He tucked the watch away. He brought her tin cup water, then a bowl of beans he had meant for his own supper. The beans had gone crusted at the edges, and he stirred in a splash of bacon fat and salt. She ate like someone who had forgotten whether taste mattered. The second spoonful slowed, the third made her eyes wet. "You will be sick if you do not slow down," he said. "Then you will blame me." She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "You talk like a doctor," once he said, a long while. She nodded, as if she had known that already. Her head sagged, then lifted again. "You should put me outside." "That would be foolish," he said. He rinsed the rag and set it on her brow. "You are on my bed, Miss Whitfield. You are not leaving it right now." "Clara," she said, "if you must be kind, do not make it formal." He considered the name in his mouth. Clara. Wind moved the cottonwoods, a soft shiver like silk. A coyote called far out toward the dry creek. Then another answered. The lamp burned strong, a little circle against the bigger dark. He checked the window that looked down the track to the east. Shadows had begun to pool, but the yard lay empty. He saw the bulge of something under her torn bodice when he shifted the blanket. Leather stitched crooked the edge of the paper. He did not reach for it, only saw it, and put it on his list. Her eyes followed his glance for a beat, then went away from him. "Tell me when you took the brand," he said. "Yesterday," she said. The words scraped. It felt like my bones went white. He made a small sound in his throat and tightened the bandage that had loosened at her wrist. "How far did you walk?" 3 days, she said. "Sometimes horses. Sometimes I could not tell the difference." "You will sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we will see what you can tell me that helps." Her eyes flared. "You will not hand me back." He looked at her and let her see what she needed. No. She lay quiet, the bad color in her skin, easing by degrees. He pulled a chair into the doorway and set his rifle across his knees. He put the lamp down low and listened to the tick and to the wind. The ground sucked down the last of the heat. Somewhere a horse stamped and blew, bored by the stillness. Clara spoke again, voice small and rough. "May I sing? It keeps the night out." "You can try," he said. He surprised himself with the want in it. She hummed, first finding the pitch, then words soft as a prayer that knew better than to ask for anything grand. "I am a poor, wayfaring stranger traveling through this world of woe." The room seemed to widen, as if a wall had sighed and relaxed. The tick of the watch fell into time with the tune. Eli sat with the rifle across his legs and watched the rectangle of the open door. The song went on, not pretty exactly, only honest. When she reached the line about no sickness, no toil, nor danger, her voice thinned and drifted to a stop. She slept with her mouth parted and one hand fisted in the quilt like a child. He turned the lamp down a notch and let the chair rock once. Outside, the flies had settled, and the last color bled out of the sky. He listened until the only thing moving was the breath in her chest and the small work of his own heart. The watch kept time. He kept watch. Dawn came in on the smell of coffee and hot iron. Elias Mercer had not slept. He sat at the table with his sleeves rolled, the watch ticking steady inside his vest, bacon curling in the pan. The room held the clean sting of lye and the low warmth of the stove. Outside, cottonwoods moved like someone smoothing a sheet. Clara Whitfield stood in the doorway, one hand on the jamb to steady herself. The swelling at her wrists had gone down a little. The color was still wrong in her face, but her eyes were clearer. She looked at the cup he slid across to her and wrapped both hands around it, as if the heat could climb from the tin into her bones. "You did not kill me," she said. Her voice was rough from sleep and whatever had come before it. "Bad habit of mine," he said. "Sit, eat slow." She eased into the chair and watched him spoon beans and eggs onto a plate. He set it in front of her and poured a second cup for himself. The first mouthful turned in her throat and then went down. When she finally raised her eyes, they held a question he already knew. "My name," she said. "You heard it last night and let it pass?" "I heard it," he said. She took a breath and reached inside the torn lining of her dress. A small leather wallet came out, stitched crooked where someone had fixed it in poor light. She did not hand it to him. She set it on the table and laid her palm on it like a pledge. "I worked for the Iron Spurs," she said. "Children of the Hands. Reader sums a few songs when the day was too hard." "Who hired you?" he asked. Her mouth made a shape that might have been a laugh on another day. "Silas Kincaid does not hire. He acquires." Eli let the watch tick. The stove snapped and settled. He waited. "I shelved books in his study when I was told to. A ledger sat there with the law books, same calf binding, same clean hand. He keeps accounts like a man who never forgets a debt." She lifted the leather and loosened the flap. Inside, paper edges showed where she had cut pages out with care and speed. Names, sums, stock that did not belong to him, favors for men who should have known better, orders for what his clerk called permanent solutions. He did not kill you when he found out, Eli said. He did not know at first, she said. He knew my name, though he needed time to know what it meant. Nathaniel Whitfield is my brother. He sits for the federal circuit. He asked questions about cattle and land. Kincaid sent letters in my hand to hold him off. He made me write them. She touched her throat where the bruises lay like a necklace. Eli put his cup down. He looked at the brand on her shoulder through the clean shirt he had given her. He saw it whether he looked or not. He burned me yesterday, she said. The words were flat. He said he wanted a mark that could be seen without lifting cloth. The watch ticked. He could smell the coffee that had gone strong and a little bitter. He folded his hands on the table and kept them there until the tremor quieted. You asked me last night whether I was a doctor, he said. Once, yes. Field work. Shiloh. After that, places without names. I sewed men back together until there were none left to sew. He saw the blood under tents that had turned brown by morning. He saw the sawdust that would not keep up. She studied him. Not like a patient studies a doctor, but like a person tries to find the shape of another person through bad light. They called you something, she said, the way Cole said it. He let the name hang a second. Angel of Shiloh. They liked to put wings on men who did not deserve them. It sounds like a kindness, she said. It was a story, he said. You can live or die by stories, but they do not change what your hands have done. She drank more coffee, and the cup clicked softly against the table when she set it down. You live alone here. Yes, he said. What burned, she asked. She had seen the small things that did not match a man by himself. The quilt mended with tidy stitches. The jar of river stones on the shelf. The spare chair always pulled too close to the table. The house, he said. He kept his eyes on the cup. 7 years. I was gone to Silver Mesa to trade. I came back to Ash and a fence post with a mark I did not put there. He did not have to speak the letter. The K lived under his skin the wrong way round. Family, she asked. One word, careful. A wife, he said. A boy. Name, she asked. This time her voice was softer. Martha. Sam. The present tense rose up at his tongue and he swallowed it back. He stood and carried the pan to the basin as if there was some reason to wash it now. Water from the pump ran cold across his fingers. He scrubbed until his hands were red and then dried them on a clean towel. Clara stared at the paper in her leather wallet, then slid it closed again. If my brother sees these, he will know how to move. Eli nodded. He did not ask to see the pages, and he did not ask for her plan. He came back to the table and checked the bandage at her shoulder. The stitches held. The skin around them looked clean. He dabbed salve again and retied the cloth that had loosened. Thank you, she said. No flourish, just the shape of thanks. He shrugged one shoulder and leaned to toss more wood into the stove. The day pressed up against the windows with a hard white light. Heat would come quick. He walked out to the pump, rinsed the basin, and stood a moment with the cold on his face. When he came back in, she had taken the needle and thread from the kit and was closing the seam of her torn dress in small, tidy bites. The steadiness in her hands did not match the welts on her wrists. Your father taught you to sew, he asked. He taught all of us to make do, she said. Stitches and traps and how to tell a hard sky from a soft one. Eli looked toward the east window. The line of the horizon was sharp enough to cut. He set the rifle where he could reach it without looking and hooked the chair with his boot to bring it a little closer to the door. Can I help, she asked. Rest helps, he said. He poured water into a clean bowl and brought it to her with a square of soap. Wash. New shirt is there. I will step out. He went to the yard and checked the corral fence, the gate latch, the shed where he kept harness. He touched the gelding on the neck and the horse turned and sighed. A fly landed on his knuckle and then lifted again into the hot shimmer. He walked to the east line where he had found her and looked at the footprints broken by last night's wind. When he came back, the cabin held a lighter air. Clara had bathed what she could and tied the clean shirt tight at the waist with a scrap cut from her ruined skirt. She had braided her hair back out of the way. The brand under the cloth still shone in his mind, but the person in front of him looked more like someone who would take a step and another after it. Show me the pistol, she said. He hesitated and then opened the cabinet and took out the small Colt. He checked the cylinder and held it across his palm so it lay safe. You will not fire inside, he said. You will learn it cold. Open, close, count without looking. She took it and weighed it, then lifted it with both hands as if it were a teacup that might spill. He corrected the set of her grip and moved her finger off the trigger. She nodded once and began to work the cylinder the way he had shown. She counted under her breath and her shoulders loosened a little when the motion turned familiar. They ate again at midday, cornbread and a slice of cured ham. He cut it thin and gave her the better piece. She watched the door as she chewed, not with fear as before, but with a habit you do not set down all at once. He cleared the plates and she stood to help him, then went quiet when the effort made her breath short. Afternoon slid along the floor in a warm band. He fixed a loose hinge on the back door, and she mended the hem of a rag rug that had frayed. Neither spoke much. The watch kept on, and the stove went cool in the heat. When shadows lengthened, he lit the lamp, and it put a small gold circle on the table. He brewed coffee that was more water than pride, and set the cup in front of her. Outside, the cottonwoods whispered, and birds settled in twos. Somewhere far off, the air thumped once like a drum in a hollow. He lifted his head and then let it drop. He moved the chair to the threshold and sat with the rifle across his knees. Clara touched the pocket where the leather wallet lay, and then dropped her hand. She looked toward the door and then at him. "May I sing again?" "If you like," he said. Her voice came thin at first, then steadier, that old wanderer's song about a road through trouble and a light beyond a hill. He did not look at her. He watched the yard, the gate, the line of fence where the flies had been. The lamp breathed, and the room held the tune as if it had been built for it. When the last note went quiet, she lay back and her eyes closed without a fight. He turned the wick down and let the cabin settle around them. The watch in his vest beat against his ribs like a second heart. He rested his hand over it and kept his other hand on the rifle. The sky went the color of old brews before full dark. Heat bled out of the yard, and the cottonwoods went still. Elias Mercer felt it in the bad leg first, a deep ache that climbed the bone and settled behind his knee. The watch in his vest kept its small count patient and sure. He put a kettle on for the evening and set the rifle within reach of the door. Clara Whitfield folded the last of her mending and looked toward the window. The light had gone thin. The glass held a reflection of the lamp, and both their faces for a moment, then lost it. She tucked the leather wallet flat under the shirt at her waist and eased her shoulders. The brand on her back pulled at the cloth when she moved. Rain began with a single large drop that struck the porch board with a clean pop. A second followed, then a handful, then a sheet. The roof took it and spread it out into a steady roar. The smell of dust turning to mud blew through the door like a story from another life. Eli stood and raised 2 fingers, quiet now. Clara nodded. She went to the lamp and turned the wick down until the flame was a coin. The watch ticked loud in the hush that fell. The first shape moved where the barn met the dark. It glided along the shadow line, careful as a cat. A second shape peeled off the cottonwoods on the left and came low. Eli did not need more than that. He reached for the rifle and checked the window that looked down the east fence. Nothing yet, which meant someone was already there. He put his mouth close to Clara's ear so he would not have to speak loud. Back room. Under the bed there is a trap door. It opens to a crawl that leads to the arroyo. If shooting starts, go. Do not wait for me. Her hand found his sleeve and held for a count. I will not leave you. He looked at her and did not soften. You will if I say. The papers have to reach the right eyes. Her chin lifted. She went without another word, and he heard the bedroom door kiss the frame. He set the chair a little to the side of the door and knelt on one knee so the window light would not mark him. Rain came sideways and rattled the porch roof. Somewhere, a horse tossed its head and blew hard. The yard stayed empty for a long breath. Then a voice rose just above the rain, a rough whisper from the dark. Mercer, hand over the girl, and you get to keep the place. He did not answer. He let the voice hunt silence. The next sound was a boot on a loose board of the porch that he had not yet fixed. That helped. The first shot came from the elm, a flash and a crack as that took a chip from the door frame not far from his cheek. He dropped flat and returned one shot low and quick, not to kill, but to make the man change his mind. He heard a curse and a stumble. Another shot hit a window on the kitchen side. Glass fell like ice. He counted under the tick of the watch. 2 near the house, at least 1 at the barn, 1 more at the east line, where he could not see him, maybe a 5th holding horses. He slowed his breathing and let his hands choose their work. The bedroom door opened a sliver. Clara slid out with the Colt in both hands, her shoulders tight and ready. He shook his head once and pointed with 2 fingers toward the kitchen. She nodded and went low, took the angle by the second window, and settled behind the table leg. A body rushed the door and slammed it with a shoulder. The latch held, but the frame groaned. Eli put a shot into the plank a hand's width above the doorknob. The body fell back with a yelp and scuttled sideways. Another tried the side window. Clara shot once and the window blew outward, her bullet taking a strip of hat brim and the skin under it. The man spat and dragged himself out of the line of fire. The rain did them favors. Visibility went to a blur. Sound went to a wash. The men outside had to guess angles and distance. Eli and Clara knew the inside of the house. They traded positions as if they had done it before, one firing to cover the other, reloading, each keeping count without speaking. The watch ticked. It cut the minutes into parts he could use. Eli waited for a lull and crawled to the back room. He pulled the bed aside with the heels of his hands slow so the legs would not scrape the floor. The trapdoor sat flush inside a frame he had cut short and tight years ago, when the land still felt like something a man could trust. He eased it up and checked the old crawl. Dry enough. The first 10 feet were friendly, then rock pressed down and made it thin. Clara slid in beside him. How far? Far enough to reach the arroyo if you keep your head. He put the flat of his hand on the crown of hers. If I say go, you do not look back. She looked at him until he met her eyes. Understood. The next push came hard. 3 at once from barn porch and kitchen. Eli and Clara fell into that old math where survival is balance. He put a round into the porch post to make the man there duck. Clara raked the kitchen window with 2 quick shots that kept the third man from climbing through. Wood splinters flew and stuck in the table like porcupine quills. When the porch man tried again, Eli was already moving. He hit the door with his shoulder and went out into rain that flattened everything. The man met him at arm's length. There was a flash of teeth and a knife edge. Eli caught the wrist and turned it into itself. The man grunted and dropped the blade. Eli drove a short strike into the place under the ear where the skull meets the neck, and the man went slack. He dragged the body inside by the collar and slammed the door with his boot heel. He bound the wrists with a strap pulled from the peg by the stove and took the man's pistol and tossed it behind the chair. The prisoner spat blood on the floor and grinned through it. "You are dead, rancher. Kincaid burns any house he likes." Eli pressed a thumb into a cluster of nerves above the collarbone and leaned in until the man choked. "Who else is out there?" The grin cracked. 3 more, one holding stock by the creek. "Which creek?" "The dry one east." The man coughed and tried to spit again, but did not have much left in him. Eli shifted pressure, and the man winced so hard he lost the thread of his bravado. "Who sent you? Say the name." "Iron Spur. Foreman said the bounty is double if the girl breathes." Clara stood behind the man with the Colt pointed down. Her mouth had the thin line of someone who has learned that some things stay thin and hard even when you want them to soften. She looked at Eli and then at the door. The rain thickened, and thunder walked across the valley. Eli felt the leg pull hard enough that his jaw set. He went to the corner where the rug lay over the old floor seam. He peeled the rug back and lifted the plank he had cut with care. The oilskin bundle still fit the hollow, the way a body fits a grave. He brought it up and set it on the table. Inside was a surgeon's kit, zipped into its roll a blue cloth with captain's bars, a journal bound in leather, a silver medal in a box that had never felt right in his palm. He did not look at any of it long. He wrapped it again and tied it tight. Clara watched him and did not ask a single question. He went to the bedroom and pulled a canvas bag from under the bed. He tossed in bandage rolls, carbolic spare cartridges, a coil of rope, dried meat, a tin of coffee, a few biscuits gone hard as stones. He took down the old slickers from the peg. He put one on her himself and pulled the collar high to cover the place where the brand lived. In the kitchen, the prisoner tested the strap around his wrists and found what he always found. Eli knelt in front of him and spoke straight. "If you go quiet, you live. If you bark, you sleep through this night. Choose." The man swallowed and kept his mouth closed. Eli pushed the chair to the pantry, opened the cellar hatch, and slid the man down the ladder to the cool dirt and the smell of potatoes. He shut the hatch and dragged a sack of flour over it. The house grew smaller, without the sound of a threat in it. The rain beat harder. They went to the barn by the covered run, so the rain did not give them away. Juniper stood with her head over the stall door, ears flicking at the noise. Eli stroked the neck and felt the horse breathe under his hand. "She will find her way home if she has to," he said more to the horse than to Clara. He saddled quickly. He checked cinches by feel. He bridled the smaller bay mare and led her out. "She is sure-footed. Trust her feet when your eyes lie." Clara nodded and set her boot in the stirrup without being told. The brand tugged when she swung up a reminder and a sting. Eli looked up once at the house he had built, board by board. The lamp inside made a square of gold against the rain. He shut the barn door quiet and mounted. They took the yard at a walk, so the horses would not throw mud high. They crossed the east line where the rain had erased most of the prints, then turned along the fence until the land dropped, and the arroyo took them. The water there was only a trickle, but the cut bank screened them. The storm moved across the flats and pulled a dark curtain behind it. Eli let his breath fall into time with the horses. The watch kept its count close to his ribs. He felt the steady animal warmth through saddle and leather and rein. Clara rode silent beside him, her hands light and exact on the reins, her eyes forward where the land opened to night. The cottonwoods gave out, and the world widened into a plain of wet grass and moving shadow. The house fell away behind them and became a memory of light in the rain. Rain thinned to a mist by the time the arroyo opened. Elias Mercer let the horses pick their way up the cut bank and onto open ground. The sky held a low, bruised purple. Wet grass came up to the stirrups and brushed their boots. Juniper shook her head and tossed water from her mane. The bay mare flicked an ear and settled into a steady jog. They rode until the land turned to low hills studded with mesquite and rock. A staggered row of buildings appeared where the slope fell brook. Red Hollow Mine had once been a town. Now it was a frame of ribs against the sky. Windows were black holes. A sign that had said feed and tack swayed on one bent nail. The air smelled of old ore and mouse nests and rain on hot iron. Eli drew up and studied the approach. 2 lanes of packed dirt met in a T. Boardwalks with missing planks ran in front of a saloon, a general store, a livery, a sheriff's office with its door hanging open. A shaft head frame leaned like a broken gallows. The wind moved through it and made a low hum. Clara Whitfield pushed wet hair back from her face and watched his eyes more than the street. "You think they will try to follow through here? If they have sense, they will." He slid off Juniper and let the reins drop. His bad leg gave him a small warning as his boot hit the ground. He ignored it and led both horses into the livery. The roof had lost half its shingles, but the stalls were sound. He stripped the saddles and left the tack draped where the leather would dry. He turned to Clara and spoke in a voice that did not need to be loud. "We make this place expensive to enter. Then we leave by a door they will not expect." She nodded once. "Give me work." He moved quick and sure, the way a man does when his mind has a map. He walked the street and set his hands on wood and wire and glass. He took telegraph wire off a fallen pole and stretched it ankle-high across the alley between the saloon and the store. He laid shards of bottle along the sheriff's porch, where a heavy boot would find them, even in rain. He barred the front door of the livery and left a back way open. He placed an old wash basin on the edge of a roof, where it would bang if someone touched the ladder. Clara watched, then mirrored. She wedged a door with a broom handle so it would jam when pushed and spring when pulled. She tied a bell from a harness to a nail head and ran a string to a back window. She found a bucket of coal and spread a line of dust where it would take a clear print. They took positions the way they had in the cabin, each with clear sight to the other. Eli crouched in the shadow of the sheriff's door rifle laid along the frame. Clara slipped into the general store behind the counter and pulled flour sacks into a crude breastwork. She slid a crate aside and found a narrow window that looked toward the livery. Silence gathered. Rain eased to a fine mist and then stopped. Water dripped steady from eaves and made little stars in the mud. The sky lightened a shade behind a bank of cloud. Bats came out of the shaft and stitched the air with quick wings. Eli let his breath settle. The watch ticked where it always ticked. The first rider showed on the ridge above town. Then 3 more. They did not push the horses. They came in slow and smart eyes on the corners. One dismounted first and looped his reins over the hitch rail. He raised a hand, and 2 others peeled right and left. The 4th held the horses and turned his head too much for a man at ease. Eli could see hats and coats and rifles, and one coat with a torn sleeve and a bandage under it. Not the same men as the first night. These moved like men with formation in their bones. He set the butt of the rifle into his shoulder and found the space between breath and trigger. Clara counted under her breath, in and out through her nose. Her father had told her to listen for the pause that comes after the body decides to breathe, and before it does. She watched the man on the right slip along the saloon wall, the same wall that held the wire. His heel found it. He stumbled and went down to a knee. The bell tied to the nail head chimed once bright and small. Eli fired. The shot took the man in the calf. He spun and fell behind the trough rifle clattering. The one on the left whipped his barrel toward the sound. Clara put a bullet into the board beside his hand and splinters cut his knuckles. He dragged back to the corner for cover. The street filled with noise and echo. Wood kicked up in white bursts. A window shattered and fell like rain. Eli moved to the other side of the door and put a second shot into the hinge of the saloon door. It dropped crooked and made a barrier that made their angles bad and his angles better. The man at the hitch rail fired down the street to pin the sheriff's door. Clara shifted and shot the bell string. The little bell fell and rolled and rang. The sound made the horse holder spook. Horses crowded and clanked bit chains. The holder swore and fought the reins. A chance opened. Eli put a bullet into the boardwalk post near the holder's thigh. The man slid behind the horses and lost sight of the street. Movement at the livery. A big frame came through the back in a rush and took the alley. He came straight for the general store. Clara waited until he was at the window and then fired. The glass blew out and he flinched, then came on through it anyway. He hit the counter like a storm and landed among flour sacks and rope. The Colt knocked from Clara's hand and skittered away under a barrel. He was large and strong and quick. His hand closed around her throat and pinned her back against the counter. He smiled a hard grin full of broken tooth and old blood. "Kincaid says you breathe," he said, voice low. He never said how easy. Her fingers clawed at his wrist and found purchase for a second, then lost it. Her knee came up. He turned, and she caught meat, not bone. Spots grew at the edges of her sight. She searched the floor with her free hand. Her palm found a shard of window glass big as a spoon. She gripped it and drove it in under his ribs where the angle was wrong and the flesh was soft. He grunted. His grip loosened. She sucked air that tasted of dust and old sugar. His hand came up again, fast and full of rage. The room cracked with a new sound. The butt of a revolver hit the side of his head and he sagged sideways. Eli was there with his jaw set and his eyes cold. He hit the man again, once more, precise and ugly, until the big body went still. "You all right?" Eli asked. He did not look away from the door. Clara pushed to her feet and made a sound that might have been yes. She found the Colt by the barrel and pulled it back into her hand. Her throat burned and her voice scraped. "He is heavy." "He will be heavier if he wakes." Eli took the man's gun and shoved it under the counter with his boot. He peered through the broken window and saw nothing that moved but rain dripping from a sign. Shots still cracked from the other side of the street, but they were scattered now. The man at the trough dragged himself along the mud and left a line as neat as a sentence. "Time to leave," Eli said. He pointed to the storage door at the rear. Old miners cut a passage from the store to the livery when they needed to move stock under fire. It is tight. It breathes. They went through the back, past shelves of tin and twine, and rusted nails to a door Douglas fir had kept from rot. Eli shouldered it open. A cool draft flowed from a black slit. The passage was narrow and low. It smelled of rock and bat and old water. He handed Clara the oilskin bundle and then the saddlebags. He took the rifle and ducked in first. The tunnel angled left, then right, then dipped. His shoulders brushed stone. Dust fell into his hair. He moved with his hand on the wall and his feet on the old plank floor, one board missing in every 15. Behind him, Clara crawled one hand, keeping the bundle from knocking, and the other on the Colt. The dark pressed down, then opened just enough to let them breathe. Eli counted the seconds under the tick that lived in his chest. It stayed steady. They came out behind the livery to a low door tucked under a lean-to. Eli pushed it with his shoulder and smelled hay gone sour and hoarse. Juniper lifted her head in her stall and blew through her nose. The bay mare turned and stamped once. He closed the door and barred it with a length of oak. Clara sagged against a post for a moment, then straightened. The marks on her throat had gone a deeper purple. He tied a bandage there with quick, competent fingers. She flinched and set her jaw. He met her eyes for a beat and then turned away to work. They saddled in silence, hands moving by habit more than thought. Eli slid the oilskin into his saddlebag and checked the cinch twice. Clara tightened the bay's girth and tugged the strap hard. He led them out the back and into the alley that ran behind the livery to the open. Night had dropped clean now. Stars showed in torn places between cloud. The head frame stood black against the lighter sky. No voices moved in the street. They rode single file along the alley, then cut across a wash and took the sage just beyond town. Hoofprints were soft in damp dirt and would read clean for anyone who knew how to read. Eli chose a path on rock where he could. The horses breathed and their tack creaked, and the night took them in. They rode in the dark until the land broke into stone. The ground heaved up in slowbacks of rock-low ridges cut by washes that smelled of wet clay. The night kept a blue cast after the rain. Stars slipped out between ragged cloud. Elias Mercer let Juniper choose the firmer footing and felt the change in her stride when she found it. The bay mare followed, ears flicking to catch every sound. Behind them came the faint drum of other horses, not fast, not far, enough to put a tightness in the chest. Eli did not look back much. He watched how the land fell away ahead and how the shadows lay. When the ground pitched down into a narrow cut, he shifted in the saddle and breathed once to settle the tremor in his right hand. The cut opened into a ravine. Walls rose on each side, close enough to touch with both hands if a man stood in the middle. Mesquite clung to the edges. Loose rocks skittered under the horses and made a quick music. Shots cracked from behind and threw stone from the wall near Clara Whitfield's knee. She lifted the bay's head and pressed on. A second shot struck near Eli's boot. He swung down while the mare still moved and sent one careful round back up the slope. Not a shout, not a curse came in answer, only a moment's pause. Another shot came. Heat sliced along his flank. He felt wet under his shirt, then warmth run along his belt. The leg that had been stiff all evening turned to wood for a breath, and then forgot the message. He kept moving. He put his shoulder against the bay's hip to help her find the notch in the path. The ravine bent and narrowed until the walls almost spoke to each other. The night turned closer. Eli put a hand on the stone and felt the cold sink into his palm. He brought both horses in behind a spill of boulders and took a knee. Clara slid down without being told and kept the reins short. Her breath came fast but even. She touched the place at Eli's side where his shirt had gone dark, and he shook his head once. Not now. He opened a saddlebag and took out a stick of dynamite wrapped in oil paper and a coil of slow fuse. The watch ticked steady under his thumb when he held it. He cut a length of fuse with his knife, measured it with his eyes, then set the watch down on his knee while he worked the cap. He bit the cap and set it and pushed the fuse home with a twist. His hands knew how to be careful. Clara watched his face more than his fingers. "You will not get another try if it goes wrong," she said. No fear in the words, only fact. He nodded. He laid the stick where the ravine necked down and piled rocks around it so the blast would throw sideways. He lit the fuse and heard it spit. The watch lay in his vest again, alive as a small heart. He put one hand to Clara's shoulder and then ran. They reached the bend before the blast. The world jumped and filled with light and sound. Dust leaped into the throat. Stones clattered like hail. Horses danced and then stilled. A slab came down near where the fuse had been and wedged itself into a tight angle. For a breath, there was no other sound. Eli coughed and wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist and tasted copper. He touched Juniper's neck. The mare was trembling but sound. The bay laid her ears and shook as if she would shake the noise out of her bones. He spoke to both horses the way a man speaks to children he does not want to frighten. Voices came behind the new fall, muffled, close. Then boots scuffed rock above and to the side. The pursuers had taken the walls. A voice called into the dark. "Mercer, doctor, a man is dying back here." Clara lifted the colt until the sights sat level. The word doctor cut through the dust like a bell that only two people heard. Eli kept low and moved his eyes, not his head. "Who is calling?" "Major Abram Cole." The tone carried command and something like respect. "We crossed paths once when tents were all a man had. I have one gut shot. He will not see dawn without hands like yours." Clara did not lower the colt. Her voice was for Eli and for no one else. "They are not speaking charity." "No." He wiped the blood at his side with a rough swipe and pressed his palm there. He listened to the walls. He listened to his own breath and the ticking under it. He had done this before in other places with other men. He knew the color of a gamble that was not about winning. "You keep your men out of the cut," Eli said. "I will give you an hour. No one fires, no one circles. At the hour we part without talk." "You have it," Cole said. His voice did not change. "Bring what you need." Eli looked at Clara. He opened his hand. She put the oilskin there without a word. He nodded once. "Stay with the horses. If I do not come, you leave when the hour turns." She held his eyes. Her face showed nothing that would unmake him. He left the colt with her and took the rifle because it was habit. He slid along the wall until the ravine widened. Shadows broke. Lamplight showed in a low pocket among the rocks where men had drawn back from the fall. 8 figures, maybe 9. One lay flat under a blanket, the fabric dark where it soaked. The smell came first, blood and gut, and old sweat under damp wool. Cole stepped into the light, close-cropped beard gone to iron-weathered eyes. He raised his hands empty and careful. "Thank you, doctor. Do not thank me." Eli set the kit on a stone and unrolled it. He found the knife, the needles, the silk, the forceps by touch. He spoke without looking up. "I need heat, water, light, alcohol, cloth that does not give lint, and a strong back on that arm." Cole moved like a man who had once obeyed orders and had not forgotten how. He set a man at the shoulder, another at the hips. He brought a lantern low and a canteen of whiskey and a tin cup. He soaked cloth and wrung it and handed it across without his fingers shaking. Eli cut the shirt from the man on the ground. The wound sat low and left of the navel star, shaped where metal had torn, in dark where it had torn back out. The belly had gone tight around its skin, shiny with fear. Eli put 2 fingers to the man's neck and found a pulse that stuttered, but did not quit. He poured whiskey into the man's mouth and then into the wound. The man bucked and swore and tried to climb away. Cole held him. "Easy, Jefferson. Breathe when he says." Eli made a small incision to widen the entrance. He slid 2 fingers in and felt for pieces that did not belong where they lay. Warmth closed over his hand. He breathed through his mouth. He found a sliver of metal and lifted it out with the forceps. He set it in a tin that rang when it took the weight. He found another. He worked by feel more than sight, the way a man reads in the dark. He sent a soldier for boiling water when his hands needed it and never waited for it. Clara stood where the ravine turned and watched a slice of the scene. She saw the rhythm change in Eli's shoulders when he went from fighter to healer. She kept her weight over the bay's withers and watched the high ground for movement. The horses blew softly and settled at the smell of him. Somewhere above, a stone clicked. Eli set a line of stitches in the bowel where it had been nicked. He counted under his breath and did not let the thread pull too tight. He laid gut back where it belonged and closed the muscle in even bites. He pressed a pad and tied it down. The lamplight made bright islands on his hands where the skin showed through blood. The man under his hands went quiet. His breath came regular. Sweat cooled on his lip. His eyes moved in small ways that meant pain had not left, but had changed. Eli sat back on his heels and wiped his knife on a rag. He felt light in the head for a blink. He put his hand on the rock and let the cold take a little of the heat from him. "He will live if rot does not set in," Eli said. "He needs a roof over him and a clean bed. He needs a doctor and a nurse who have more time and linen than I have." Cole nodded. "There is a man outside Silver Mesa who works clean," he said. "Name of Bell." "I know him," Eli said. His voice was rough. "Tell him Elias sent you. Tell him to change the dressing before it wets through and to watch the right corner where I had to bring things together." Cole gave a short nod. He looked at the wound and then at Eli's side, where the shirt had gone stiff. "You are hit." Later, Eli rose. The world dipped once and righted itself. He packed the kit with hands that did not drop anything. He tied the roll with a neat square knot he had tied 1,000 times. "Our hour is not done," Cole said. "Take fresh mounts. Yours are blown." He signaled to a young man who led 2 horses forward, both wet but new to the work. The man who brought them had a scar from temple to jaw and eyes that watched more than they spoke. He handed over the reins without comment. Eli took them and gave the man a look that said what needed saying. He swung up careful so the left side did not pull too hard. Cole stepped in. He looked up at Eli the way men look when they remember tense and cold mornings and bad orders. "You could have let him die," Cole said. The words were not accusation. Eli looked past him to the man on the ground and then back. "My hands remember what they are for." Cole's mouth moved and then stopped. He put a gloved hand to the brim of his hat in a gesture that was not quite salute and not quite blessing. "The way splits before us," he said. "Keep your watch close." Eli turned the new gelding and felt the animal's fresh spring. He led Juniper behind on a lead so her good sense could be borrowed later. Clara fell in at his shoulder and set the bay to a smooth walk. She looked at him and at the place under his ribs and said nothing. He watched the rim of the ravine and the notch where the stars made a crooked cup. The night took them in and held them a little while. The smell of carbolic and blood rode with them until clean air pushed it back. First light found the cottonwoods silvered along a low rise west of Silver Mesa. A 2-story house sat there with a squat outbuilding to the side. Boards planed smooth and painted the clean white of a man who likes things neat. Elias Mercer rode up slow. The new gelding blew once. Juniper followed on a lead with her ears forward. Clara Whitfield kept the bay at Eli's knee, face drawn but steady. A man with iron hair and spectacles stepped out to the porch before Eli could knock. He took them in without hurry. The bruises at Clara's throat, the red seeping through Eli's side, the road dust on everything else. "You still collect trouble like Burrs Elias," he said. "Hello, Horace," Eli said. "We need water and a room that does not leak." Dr. Horace Bell lifted a hand. "Stable them, then inside." The outbuilding smelled of carbolic and horses. They led the animals into clean stalls and stripped Bakik with hands that had learned each other's timing. Eli stiffened once when the girth pulled at his wound and said nothing. Bell watched from the door and did his counting in silence. Inside the house held books to the ceiling and a set of framed steel engravings on one wall. A clock ticked in the hall, with a sound that made Eli's watch fall into step. Bell pointed at a narrow bed in a small room with a window to the yard. "Shirt," he said. "Off." Eli pulled the fabric loose where it stuck, and grunted once when the dried blood gave. Bell's fingers were sure and spare. He cleaned the crease along Eli's flank with water that steamed in the basin and a cloth that did not shed lint. He peered in close, then made 2 small stitches where the skin refused to meet. He packed salve along the line and bound it tight. "You walked and you rode on this," Bell said. The tone was not a question. "I did what was in front of me," Eli said. Bell turned his head to Clara. Her voice did not lose its shape when she answered his unasked questions. Name, work, the thing that had been done to her back, the small book she did not take out. "Sit," Bell told Clara. He tilted her chin with 2 fingers and checked her pupils, the bruised laces along her throat, the cuff marks on her wrists. "You will talk fine in a day if you let it rest." He pressed a cool cloth at her neck, and she closed her eyes for a breath that trembled and then held. He set a small tin on the table. "Honey and lemon. Sip. No shouting unless it saves a life." They ate at Bell's kitchen table with its clean scar from a scalpel left there years ago. Coffee came black and strong, bread still warm from the oven, a slice of ham that tasted of smoke and care. Bell ate like a man fueling a body for the work of the day. Eli watched the window while he chewed. "The station agent sent a notice up the line," Bell said, nodding toward a folded paper by the clock. "The judge's train lost time east of the flats. Weather and a break on the freight car. He will not see Silver Mesa until late tomorrow." Bell paused. "There is more in town than a delay. Riders all morning, men who do not turn their hats in church. Word is that Silas Kincaid came in at dawn with extra hands." Clara kept her hand on the tin cup so the heat would not leave it. Her eyes did not move from Bell's face. "Who else?" she said, not above a whisper. "A fellow out of St. Louis registered at the hotel near the tracks," Bell said. "He carries a long rifle in a canvas sleeve and walks like he never has to run. Calls himself Cassius Pike when someone will listen. Pinkerton once, no longer." Eli's mouth flattened. He took a swallow of coffee that did nothing for his thirst. "How many wearing pistols that belong to them?" "Enough to make the saloon feel wired," Bell said. Eli pushed his plate away an inch and stood. His right hand rested against his vest as if to quiet something. He looked at Clara and then at Bell. "I will have what passes for a plain suit and a hat that makes me older. I will stroll your town like a man sent for gauze and a bottle of laudanum. I will not linger." Bell studied him, then opened a wardrobe and pulled a faded frock coat that smelled of clean storage. He added a crumpled felt hat and a cane with a worn handle. He stuffed a little wool under Eli's shoulders and set the hat low. He smudged a line of ash along Eli's jaw to blur the edge of his chin. He put a wire-rimmed pair of spectacles in Eli's hand. "For the look," he said, "not the sight." Eli turned the glasses once between forefinger and thumb. He let the cane take a measure of his weight and softened his back as if time had added weight to it. He hooked the watch chain to the new vest and let the tick sit steady near the hollow of his throat. "Do not go," Clara said. The words scored her throat, but she said them anyway. "I will be back," Eli said. It was not a promise, it was how he chose to breathe that hour. Bell lifted a satchel with the clean smell of linen and stacked it with small parcels. "If anyone asks, you are fetching poultice and a bottle of carbolic," he said. "You will avoid the jail like it bites. You will nod to no one you know." Clara smoothed the front of the borrowed shirt. Her hands found the seam and tightened it. "I will keep the house quiet," she said. Bell looked at her in a way that measured and accepted. "There is a small pantry there," he said, pointing with his chin. "Under the rye and the potatoes is a square cut into the floor. If the door knocks wrong, you climb down. Pull the flour sack over the lid and keep your breath in your chest until the wind changes." Eli and Bell took the wagon down the lane with the sun a fist high. Silver Mesa sat on the plain with a low plume of smoke over it from the morning train. The main street gathered everything in one long line, the hotel with a porch and a row of chairs, a pair of saloons with green glass windows and sawdust on the floor, a saddle shop that looked new. Men leaned where men lean when they are looking for permission to do what they came to do. Eli kept the hat brim low. He let the cane tap. He did not look up when a rider passed close and slow. Inside the pharmacy, a bell on a spring made one clean note. The apothecary nodded, and went to fill a list Belle had written in a neat hand. Eli kept his eyes on the shelf labels and his ears elsewhere. He heard the clatter of Spurs outside, and a voice with the lilt of Missouri say the name Kincaid without lowering for it. He heard a low remark about a judge who would not like the weather. He heard the tight silence that falls when a man with a reputation opens a door and does not smile. When he stepped out with the satchel in his grip, a man in a city coat crossed the boardwalk 30 paces away. He carried a long case the way someone who has rehearsed carries an instrument. His face had a stillness that did not ask for company. Eli did not slow. He moved at the rate of an old assistant with a bottle that might spill eyes on his boots. At the telegraph office, he lifted 2 notes for Belle and 1 for the marshal's postbox without reading them. The clerk with the ink-stained fingers glanced up and then down quick. The wires chattered along the wall with a sound that made Eli think of cicadas. They drove back the long way. The cottonwoods above Belle's rise looked the same as when they had left them. The light lay warmer across the boards. A bird called from the ditch and got an answer. When the wagon turned into the yard, the house stayed quiet, the way a house stays quiet when it is trying not to breathe. Belle set the brake. Eli stepped down and the cane found the ground. He moved to the porch and put his hand on the knob without turning it. The knob moved under his palm. The door opened a hair, and Clara's eye looked through the crack. She let them in and closed the door behind with care. Her color had come back a little. The brand under the shirt still pulled, and the raw around her wrists looked angrier for having rested. She kept her voice inside the room. 3 men came, she said. They rode hard and did not tie the reins like they would if they planned to stay. They went through the barn and the first room and the pantry. One of them moved the sack over me and laughed because it was heavy. Then they left because there was nothing to find. Belle's jaw worked once. He set the satchel on the table and took a long breath through his nose. "My house is not a church to men like that," he said. He checked the window where the curtain pulled wrong and smoothed it. Eli took off the hat and let the shape of his back return to itself. He set the cane in the corner and wiped the ash from his jaw with a towel. He looked different again. The room let him be that way without remark. He had gathered a handful of things that were not gossip. The hotel clerk had spoken the name Cassius Pike to someone who wanted to hear it. The rider from the south side had told a farrier to keep 4 horses saddled through sundown. 2 deputies had bought whiskey with Kincaid's money and had not finished their first bottle. A man in a gray coat had passed a slip of paper to the sheriff, and the sheriff had tucked it into his inside pocket as if it might burn if air found it. Eli poured water from the pitcher into a glass with a clean lip and drank. He set the glass down and rolled his shirt sleeve to give Belle a look at the bandage. It had held. The stain had not spread. Belle nodded once and turned to Clara to check her throat. Her voice came easier. "You were gone an hour," Clara said. "You look older, and then you do not." "That is the coat," Eli said. He buttoned it closed on the peg where it hung for next time. He put the watch back where it sat right and listened to it count. The light shifted along the floorboards in a long, bright stripe. Somewhere out by the cottonwoods, wind brushed leaves into the sound of a far river that was not there. Night took the color out of the cottonwoods and left them a line of dark spines against the sky. Dr. Bell's yard went quiet after supper, lamps turned down and windows black. Elias Mercer sat with his watch in his palm until the tick steadied the tremor in his right hand. Then he put it back into his vest and stood. Belle set a folded paper on the table edges square and clean. "Sarah Lowell will put it into the right hands," he said. "She keeps Dr. Malcolm's surgery standing when Malcolm can't. She knew tents and field cots long before this town had a name." Clara Whitfield held a stub of pencil and wrote a line under Eli's neatly printed note. The letters were small and exact. She did not sign her name. She pressed the fold tight and slid the paper into a thin oilskin sleeve. Belle saddled the buggy. The road into Silver Mesa lay dark and empty, except for the scrape of insects in the ditch. The town smelled of damp dust and coal smoke when he reached it. He tied the horse by the surgery with a knot a man could undo in a hurry. A single lamp glowed behind a frosted pane. Sarah opened the door before he knocked, her hair pulled tight, sleeves rolled, eyes awake. Belle gave her the oilskin without preface. She read the first line, then the last, then folded it back and tucked it into her skirt. Her face did not change. "I will see that it reaches the major," she said. The words had weight. Back at the house, Eli and Clara waited without filling the room with talk. The clock on Belle's wall counted slow. Somewhere a coyote called, far off answered once, then was done. When the hands reached a place, they both knew Eli rose and took his hat. Belle handed him a coil of thin rope and a lantern that did not rattle. The doctor's eyes held worry without the weakness of it. San Miguel Mill sat a mile down the creek bed, a broken ribcage on a low bluff. The wheel hung slant black teeth against a paler sky. The creek ran shallow under it, a line of dark glass that took the starlight and kept it. Cottonwood fluff had gathered in corners like old snow. Boards in the wall had pulled apart in long seams. Owls owned the rafters. Eli walked the circle once, without the lantern boots, careful breath quiet. He marked the ways in and the ways out, the places where boards still held the places where they would not. Clara waited by the cottonwoods until he lifted a hand. She came down the bank and stepped into the black mouth of the mill, with her weight light and exact. She breathed the smell of wet wood and old grain and gave the space a slow turn with her eyes. She put her back to a stone pillar and let the darkness fit her like a coat. Eli set the lantern on the floor and shaded it with his hat, just enough light to make edges out of shadow. Midnight gathered. The creek made a small, steady sound. Somewhere a nightbird clicked. Eli's watch ticked like a cricket in the vest. He looked at the door and saw nothing but the open shape of it and the frame of stars beyond. He counted 100 and then another. He felt the mill hold its breath. No rider came. No step sounded on the loose gravel. The owls spoke once, then swallowed it. Eli let the count run one more line, then crossed the open floor and lifted the lantern just enough to bleed a little light across the main post. A square of paper sat there crisp and white against the gray wood, pinned high with an iron nail. The pin had gone in, clean and sure. He slid the paper off the nail and held it where the light touched it. The hand was neat, and trained letters stood to attention numbers, set as if they could not be other than what they were. Coyote Gulch Bridge 50. Pike +8 posted along East Ridge. Train due 5:17. Primary first passenger car. Secondary U. Kincaid observes North Bluff. This squares us. No signature, no flourish. The nail hole in the corner felt like the period the sender did not write. Clara read over his shoulder. Each line changed her face by a fraction, only a small shift at the eyes, then the mouth. Her thumb rested a moment on the word U. It made a small grease mark in the margin. He folded the paper once, then again, and slid it into his vest. The watch sat under it and ticked against the new weight. He lifted the lantern higher and swept the beam across the post. The nail head caught the light. There was a second mark above it, shallow and old. Someone had hung something else there once. He lowered the light and let the room go back to darkness. They walked the creek bank a short stretch without speaking. The night wrapped them in cool. The cottonwoods whispered in a voice that sounded like water under wind. Clara pulled the collar of Belle's shirt up to hide the place on her back where the brand lived. Eli saw the movement without looking at it. He let his hand rest a second on his vest where the note lay. At the rise they stopped. The mill showed as a darker shape against a less dark sky. Eli felt the pull of his side where the stitches had started to itch. He breathed slow and let his mind sort the words on the page into the map in his head. Clara looked at his face and then down at his hand, then away. "He is not our friend," she said, meaning Cole without saying his name. "He is a man who knows the cost of a promise," Eli said. "Tonight he kept one." Her mouth softened at the edge. Her voice held a rasp that might never fully leave. "You," the paper said. "Plain as that." Eli let the words sit a moment. He looked out over the creek where the water took the starlight and moved it along. He had felt the sightline settle on his body before in fields with no cover, and on streets where windows looked like mouths. He put his right hand flat on the rail of the mill bridge and watched it hold. "We should not stand here," Clara said. "Not like this." He nodded. They moved up the rise and into the cottonwoods, and then along the fence line boots, picking quiet ground. The house lights of Belle's place showed as small coins far off. A dog barked once and was told to hush. The night held. Belle opened the door before their knuckles touched it, as if the house had told him who was there. He took the paper and read it the way Sarah had, top to bottom, without needing to go back. He did not draw out the last line, but he did not skip it. He set the note down under a paperweight shaped like a horse's head. He looked at Eli's bandage and lifted a brow. Eli shook his head once, and the banker let the look pass. Clara went to the basin and washed her hands with water that had gone cool. The skin at her wrists had turned a sick yellow around the purple. The brand would not fade, but the skin around it had calmed. She tied the clean shirt tighter at the waist and felt the relief of cloth that was not torn. Belle poured coffee because there was nothing else to do with his hands. He set a cup in front of each of them and stood with his own untouched. The clock in the hall counted a small piece of the night. In the yard, the cottonwoods moved as if someone were passing through them without hurry. Clara touched the edge of the note with one finger and then took her hand away. She looked at Eli and let him see that her eyes were clear. He set his palm flat on the table near the paper fingers, spread the watch ticking under the wood. In the quiet, she hummed a run of notes under her breath, the bones of that old song about a stranger on a road. It did not fill the room. It set a line through it clean and spare. Eli listened, and let his chest loosen enough to take it in. The lamp on Belle's table burned with a steady flame. The house breathed. The night held to its own rhythm, small and certain. Heat rose off the rails in a wavering sheet. Coyote Gulch cut the earth clean, a dark scar under the iron bridge. The east ridge lifted like the spine of some old thing. Sage pressed flat in the wind. Elias Mercer kept to the west slope, where scrub could hide a man who knew how to be small. He watched the line of the ridge through a brass glass. 8 figures set at intervals, hat brims low, the gleam of a long rifle in the middle canvas case open at its feet. A man stood apart with the stillness of a practiced hand. He checked the light, then the angle to the tracks, then nothing at all. Cassius Pike did not fidget. Clara Whitfield used the cottonwood fringe south of the bridge. Her breath came slow through her nose. Dust lay in her mouth like chalk. She brought the glass to her eye and counted. 8 on the ridge, 2 horses on the north bluff, with 2 men standing. One of them held a field glass. Even from here, his stance wrote its name. Silas Kincaid watched other people's work. Eli turned the glass to the far horizon. A thread of smoke rose where the track bent. He closed the glass and slid it under his shirt. He put his hand to his vest and felt the steady tick near his ribs. Clara watched him across the distance. He lifted 2 fingers, then pointed left. She nodded and slid forward through willow and sage. The rails began to sing. Light ran along the steel and broke into bright spots under the bridge. The wind carried coal and hot iron. A whistle called out thin and far earlier than the numbers on the paper in his pocket. Plans that had sat neat in his head scattered like birds. Eli ran low. The scrub clawed at his pants. He felt the pull in his stitched side and kept moving. He came up under a shelf of rock below the nearest rifleman and set the butt of the Winchester to his shoulder. 1 breath in, 1 slow out. He put a round into the man's forearm just above the wrist. The rifle jumped free and rang on stone. Clara broke from the cover of cottonwood and took a knee behind a boulder that tasted of old heat. She placed her first shot at a shin where a boot had no cover. The man yowled and rolled. Her second shot chipped the rock inches from another hand. The line faltered. 3 heads turned away from the tracks to her. The train whistle called again, closer now. Pike did not rush. He adjusted for the new variables like a man working a sum. His rifle came to his shoulder in one smooth piece. He took a breath and let it settle. He did not look at Clara. He watched for the motion on the west slope he had seen a minute before. Eli moved between rocks and shadow, a brief frame of a man against light. Pike fired. Stone burst near Eli's cheek. Grit stung his eye. He slid to new cover and sent 2 rounds at an arm that showed past a rock. Blood marked the stone. The man cursed and went still. Eli counted under the watch until his hands were steady. Kincaid stood on the north bluff with 1 boot on a rock. He lifted his glass and tracked the train as it eased into the curve. He did not speak. The man beside him shifted his weight from foot to foot and watched Pike work. Clara tracked to her right, nearer the ridge but still under cover. The Colt was clean in her hand. She saw the engineer lean on the whistle and haul back on the brake. Wheels screamed. Sparks snapped under the engine and fell in a fan of gold. A face appeared in the first passenger window and then vanished. A rifleman on the east ridge found his courage and sprang from cover to reposition. Clara shot him through the calf. He pitched and slid down the shale on his back. She moved again before the dust cleared. 2 of the gunmen changed to pistols to swing faster. Their shooting grew wild. Eli used that. He put a round into a shoulder to ruin a draw. He raked the rock above another to make him duck out of time. Pike shifted 2 paces for a better angle on Eli. The shot line was thin but open. A small smile touched one corner of his mouth. He settled the crosshairs and took up the slack. The world narrowed to a man crossing a gap, and the weight of a trigger against a fingertip. Eli broke cover to draw the barrel away from the train. He felt his body in slices, feet and knees and lungs, and the hot thorn in his side. He knew where the shot would try to put him. He saw the glass lift on the north bluff and tilt. He heard the watch more than the whistle. He moved anyway. Pike fired. The bullet took Eli in the left arm and spun him toward the rock. He caught himself on the bad side and saw a bright wash of white go through him. He stayed on his knees and brought the Winchester up, like a man lifting a heavy lid. He fired blind at where the smoke had bloomed. He missed. He did not stop moving. Clara's breath went thin at the edges. She drew a bead on Pike, but the angle was wrong and the distance unkind. She put a bullet close enough to make him shift his cheek on the stock. He corrected faster than she could draw a second sight. He set for the finishing shot. Another report cut the air from a different height and distance. Pike's head snapped back. His rifle jerked skyward and cracked at nothing. He took one slow step that had no ground in it and dropped behind the rock. Clara swung her glass to the north bluff. A single figure lowered a rifle and turned his face out of the light. Major Abram Cole watched the ridge long enough to be certain of what his bullet had done. He glanced once toward the west slope. Then he stepped back from the crest and was gone. The sound of the train filled the gulch. The engine threw steam at the curve and lumbered across the bridge. Steel complained and held. Men leaned out of the caboose with rifles in their hands, eyes searching for targets and orders. An arm waved from the first passenger car, then pulled back. The line on the ridge broke. Without Pike's quiet weight, the math changed. 2 men grabbed their wounded. One tossed his pistol into scrub so he could pull a comrade easier. Another slid down the back of the ridge on his heels and ran bent along the contour. Bullets chased them at long range and hit dirt. Eli pressed his back to the rock and worked the Winchester by feel. Blood ran to his wrist and made the stock slick. He breathed to a count he had known since tents and field lamps. He watched for any last man foolish enough to hold his ground. The few shots that came now were parting shots, anger without aim. Clara scanned for Kincaid. The north bluff held 2 horses and 1 man now. He stood a long moment and looked down at the bridge where the train crawled like a loaded animal. He folded the field glass and put it into a leather case. He stepped into the saddle and moved east at a brisk walk that grew to a lope once he had cover. Dust took him. The train cleared the bridge and halted in a scream of brake and steam on the west side. The engine breathed like a big thing that had been run too hard. Heat rolled down the cars. Men in railroad coats dropped to the ballast with rifles ready and spread along the track eyes to the ridge and the bluff and the scrub below the trestle. Eli rose and tested his arm. Fire shot from elbow to shoulder and settled into a hard throb. He slung the rifle one-handed and moved to the bridge in a jog that kept his side from pulling stitches. His boots found the set of old ties without looking. He checked the underside where a man might crawl to do a fool thing. Nothing but cobweb and iron. Clara left her cover when the last wild shot died. She picked her way up the slope head low. She reloaded as she climbed. Her fingers were clean and quick. She crossed to Eli as he reached the far end of the bridge. Steam dampened her face with gritty wet. Coal smoke clawed the back of her tongue. She saw the blood at his sleeve and put her hand there, then pulled it back when he flinched. He set his jaw and gave her a short nod. "We finish what is in front of us." He stepped to a railroad detective with a badge on his vest. The man looked Eli up and down and did not like what he did not know. "Gunmen on the East Ridge are leaving," Eli said. "1 dead on the line, 2 wounded. The rest will find horses. The one you want is on the north bluff. He will be out of range by now." The detective jerked a chin and sent 2 men for the ridge at a trot. Another went under the bridge with a lantern to check bolts and pins and whatever else his trade taught him. The engineer leaned from the cab and shouted a question no one bothered to answer. Clara stood with her back to the car where the first passengers watched through glass. Faces, pale eyes, bright. A child stared and pressed a hand to the window. The hand left a print. Clara put her palm up to it through the glass. The child smiled in a small, cracked way and pulled back when a woman drew him close. Eli briefed in short sentences until there was nothing left to say that mattered on the track. He looked to the north bluff one last time. It sat empty now. The wind moved the grass there in long strokes. He tasted iron and creosote and felt the shake in his right hand begin again. He closed his fingers and it quieted. The detective with the badge nodded once at Eli, without committing to gratitude. The crewmen pulled themselves back aboard. Steam bled and settled. The engine took a breath as if it knew how to do that. Eli stepped back from the rail and let air move where his body had been. Clara came to stand beside him. She put her free hand flat against her ribs and felt the song she had used to steady herself try to come. She did not give it voice. The bridge hummed under them with the last of the train's weight. The ridge was quiet. The gulch held the spent sound and let it die. Steam drifted across the bridge and thinned in the heat. The engineer leaned from the cab with his cap shoved back and sweat on his lip. A railroad detective with a tin star on his vest lifted a hand at Elias Mercer and Clara Whitfield, as if to clear fog with a gesture. "On board," the man said. "The conductor wants you out of this cut." Eli nodded once. He felt the ache in his left arm wake when he moved. He climbed the steps with his right hand on the rail boots clanging on iron. Clara followed the colt low at her side, hair pulled back with a strip of clean cloth Belle had tied for her that morning. Coal dust clung to her shirt where steam had blown. Inside the first passenger car, the air held varnish and wool and the ash of breath. People stood or half stood and held themselves together by habit, hats crushed in hands. A woman fanned a child with a folded timetable and watched the aisle with a careful face. The seats were the dark shine of good wood. The floor had a grit that whispered underfoot. A man stepped from the far end, tall and spare hair streaked with early gray. His coat had the straight line of a court. The mouth was the same as Clara's set for arguments that mattered. When he saw her, the shape of him broke. Clara took one step and another, and then she was against him, arms around his ribs. They held each other the way people do who have used up too many words. Nathaniel Whitfield pressed his chin to her hair and closed his eyes. He made a sound that no one else needed to hear. He pulled back enough to see the bruise that circled her throat and the lace of scars at her wrists. His hands trembled once and stopped. "You are here," he said. His voice stayed low. "Are you hurt in a way that cannot wait?" Clara shook her head. Her eyes were clear now. She reached to her waist under the shirt and brought out the leather wallet with the crooked stitching. She held it between both palms, then placed it in his hands with the care of a person passing a match in wind. Nathaniel slid the flap back. He did not sit. He stood in the aisle with the train's weight under his boots and turned the first page. Names looked back in a regular hand. Sums and dates and the small, neat words men use to make ugly things look tidy. His mouth thinned at one line and eased at the next. He turned another page, then another, not pausing for what he already knew to be true. He looked up. "Thank you," he said to Clara, the two words as full as he could make them. He lifted his gaze to Eli. "Sir?" Eli had set his back against the seat end to keep the arm quiet. A railroad man in shirt sleeves and a leather pouch slung across his body knelt with a roll of gauze and a bottle that smelled like carbolic. He cut Eli's sleeve and cleaned along the cut with brisk impersonal care. The linen burned and then cooled. Eli kept his eyes on the window where steam made moving shapes of the trees. The watch in his vest kept count against the glass. "She did the heaviest lifting," Eli said. He flinched when the gauze bit fresh skin and let his breath out slow. "She walked this far with a mark on her back and a book sewn into her dress. I only kept time and stitched where it opened." Nathaniel looked at Clara again and took in the line of her shoulders and the steady way she held herself. He nodded once, not a bow, not gratitude, as a show just the recognition of what had been done. He turned to the conductor who had hovered near with a ledger in his hand and worry on his face. "We will need a quiet corner," Nathaniel said. The conductor pointed to a small compartment at the end of the car and stepped aside. Passengers sat down when the conductor touched their sleeves, as if that touch carried a charge that put them back in their places. A child who had pressed a hand to the glass earlier now watched Eli with solemn interest. When Eli met his eyes, the boy smiled a little and hid it behind his mother's skirt. They moved into the compartment. It held a table that folded from the wall and two narrow benches faced in. The window looked down on brush and gravel and the curve of the bridge. The train still hissed in short bursts that made the walls tick. Nathaniel spread the pages on the table and smoothed the edges with his fingertips. His hands were neat. His nails were clean. He did not touch more than he had to. Clara sat with her back to the wall and her hands in her lap. She did not look at the pages now. She watched Nathaniel's face. She could read him the way some people read weather. A muscle jumped in his cheek when he found a name he had hoped not to see. His eyes stayed a shade longer on a figure where the zeros cured without hesitation. The railroad medic finished the wrap on Eli's arm and checked the binding at his side. He tied it with a knot that would hold when the floor moved. "Eat something," he said, voice flat with competence. "You bleed less when your belly remembers its work." Eli nodded and took a biscuit someone pushed into his good hand. It tasted like salt and iron and grain. He chewed, and the watch ticked, and the wheels under the car clicked once as the train shifted on the bridge. Nathaniel lifted a page and held it to the light. He looked through the paper as if that would show him whatever else it held. He lowered it. He put the pages back together in the order Clara had kept. He did not reach for a pen. He did not speak the name that had been in both their mouths too much already. He put his palm on the leather and looked at his sister. "I see what you did," he said. It was simple and plain. He reached and put his thumb at the edge of the bruise on her throat without touching it. His mouth softened. His voice lost the edges he wore in a room with a gavel. "You are here." Clara made a small shape that might have been a laugh if it had not been so thin. "I am tired," she said. The word sounded like water over rock. She looked across the small space at Eli. He held her gaze for a beat and gave the smallest nod as if to say that tired counted as a thing, not a failure. The conductor stuck his head in and spoke low. "Track is clear. We roll when the engine breathes right." He looked at Eli's arm and at Clara's throat and at Nathaniel's face and tipped his cap without show. They sat while the train found its rhythm again. The first lurch set stiff legs to bracing. The floor hummed. The windows showed brush and rock, and then the open where the plane started again. Steam stripes unrolled behind them and vanished. The people in the main car settled back into their lives and spoke in smaller voices. Someone laughed once high and bright, then hushed it with a hand. Nathaniel rested his palm on the leather wallet, and the pages inside as if to keep them from sliding away with the motion. He glanced at Eli across the table. "You fought and you sewed," he said. He did not make it a question or a judgment. Eli looked at the wrap on his arm as if it belonged to someone he had known a long time. "Sometimes I held the knife," he said. "Sometimes I put it down." He lifted his eyes and met Nathaniel's. He did not explain. He did not need to. Clara leaned her head back and let the seat support it. The lines at the corners of her eyes eased for a moment. The brand on her back tugged when the car jolted a live line under clean cloth. She breathed through the pull and set her mouth into the old song, only the bones of it so low that no one else heard. Eli heard. The watch kept time with the wheels, and the notes found their place between them. The medic returned with a strip of cloth soaked in cool water. He handed it to Clara without words. She pressed it to her throat and felt the heat leave her skin. When she lowered the cloth, the shape of the bruise looked the same, but it did not burn as much. The car took a long inhale and held it as the bridge fell behind. Gravel flashed past, then scrub, then a band of cottonwoods where water hid. The sun dropped a little and laid gold along the brass fixtures. The compartment became a small, warm box with a table and 3 bodies and the steady pulse of travel. Nathaniel closed the leather and tied it shut with the rough thong that had held it since Clara sewed it into her dress. He put both hands on it and then slid it close to his body. He looked at his sister and at the man who had brought her to this aisle in this car at this hour. His eyes held thanks that did not need ceremony. "Rest," Nathaniel said to Clara. He touched the back of her hand with 2 fingers. He looked at Eli again, took in the line of his jaw, the set of his good shoulder, the quiet in him. He gave a short nod that meant enough for now. The train carried them forward. Wheels sang their dry song, and the car swayed in a rhythm that had its own mercy. Eli let his eyes half close and listened to the tick under his vest. Clara leaned her head against the window and watched light slide along the glass in slow strips. Nathaniel sat straight and still, with his hands on the leather and his face turned toward nothing anyone could see. Silver Mesa came on with the heat of the late day and the small clatter of a town trying to look larger than it was. The train slid past stock pens and a water tower, then sighed into the station. Coal grit lifted off the cars and drifted over the platform in a gray sheet. Men in hats turned to watch. Women gathered skirts. A dog slept under a bench and did not bother to wake. The conductor tipped his cap at Nathaniel Whitfield and opened the door. Eli stepped down first, his bad arm tight to his side, the watch steady at his ribs. Clara followed, hair braided clean, and the borrowed shirt tucked close at the waist. The bruise at her throat showed where the collar would not hide it. Nathaniel came last with the leather wallet pressed under his palm. Marshal Avery Boone waited beyond the baggage carts with 2 deputies. The badge on his vest caught the light. His face held the weather of this county and the habit of keeping talk short. He looked at Nathaniel, then at Clara, then at Eli. His eyes moved once to the bandage on Eli's arm and did not linger. Judge Whitfield Boone said, Marshal Nathaniel said. He lifted the leather a fraction. The movement was small and exact. Boone read what it meant and gave one short nod. Dr. Bell stood a little off to the side with his hat in his hand. He had changed coats and shaved the lines at his eyes cut deeper by the light. A wagon waited at the curb. He did not wave. Eli saw him, felt something in his chest loosen, and walked that way with Clara at his shoulder. The station had a telegraph window that did brisk business in worry. The key chattered without pause. A clerk wiped his inked fingers on a rag and took a fresh sheet. Behind the window paper curled in a metal tray. The room smelled of hot brass and dust. Nathaniel and Boone stepped inside without looking back. Their voices did not carry. Bell set Eli on the wagon seat with a look that did not invite argument. Clara climbed up slow and careful and sat on the far side. The cottonwoods along Bell's road held the last of the day in their leaves. Their long, pale undersides flashed when a breeze tugged them. Gravel clicked under the wagon tires. The horses moved like they were glad to be off the platform. At Belle's porch shade lay thick. The house had a way of meeting trouble with clean boards and coffee ready. Inside, the air held the smell of carbolic and bread. Belle pulled the bandage from Eli's arm and unwound it with fingers that did not tug more than they had to. The wound had gone from raw to angry. Not pretty, not failing. Belle washed it again. He sat Eli at the table and set a cup where his right hand could find it. Clara stood by the open window and let the heat run past her skin. She untied the strip around her throat and pressed a cool cloth there. Belle looked at the mark that had been burned into her back through the thin shirt, and then looked away. He poured another cup and set it by her elbow. Her fingers wrapped around the heat and did not let go. The clock in the hall counted in its clear way. Eli took out his watch and held it flat, then raised it to his ear as if to make certain it had not learned any bad habits in the gulch. He set the stem and turned it 2 clicks to match Belle's clock where it stood. The small sound of the set pin dropping into place felt like something binding closed. Boots sounded on the boards. Nathaniel came in with Boone behind him. The marshal's hat stayed in his hand. A dust print marked his vest where a paper had written. Belle brought out clean glasses. Boone took one, and set it down untouched. "There is a lot of paper in that town office now," Boone said. He did not elaborate. He faced Clara with the small, respectful tilt a man gives a person who did something he did not expect. "Miss Whitfield," he said. He held the name steady. She kept her chin level and said yes. Nathaniel set the leather on Belle's table and kept a palm on it, not protective, not possessive, only present. His gaze moved from Eli to Clara and stayed. The room held the gentle clink of cups and the far hum of town noise. Somewhere outside, a wagon creaked, and a child called the name of a dog in a voice that turned the name into a song. A woman in a starched apron stepped into the doorway and nodded to Belle. He nodded back. Supper was ready because supper came at the hour it came in houses that kept their habits. Belle cut bread and laid slices in a fan. He placed a plate in front of Eli and one for Clara. He did not last long at the table. He rose twice to fetch more cloth once to check the boil on a kettle. He moved like water around rock. Later, when the sun had dropped and the edges of things blurred, Sarah Lowell knocked and came in with a quiet step. She carried a small envelope, corners sharp, seal clean. She set it in Belle's hand and looked at Eli. Her eyes held a question and an answer at once. He gave her a nod that covered both. Belle broke the seal with a fingernail and slid out a single folded slip. He read the line and then passed it to Eli without comment. The handwriting was a neat army hand. One sentence sat level on the page. "North Bluff clean. Your hour stands." No name, nothing for the drawer. Eli put the paper down and laid a finger over the period. The room did not change. The county did not shift. His hand steadied where it rested on the table. He took a slow swallow of coffee and tasted the bitter and the heat. Sarah cleared her throat. Her voice stayed low. "There is talk in town," she said, as if reporting a patient's fever. "Old talk mostly. Billard on the South Road claims Iron Spur kept a boy for a season after a fire years back. No one remembers whose." She let the words sit. She did not reach for them again. Eli's hand went to the watch without thought. He did not pull it free. He let the feel of the case under his palm speak to him and to no one else. Nathaniel lifted his face toward the open window and listened to the cottonwoods rub leaves together. He said nothing. Boone reached for his hat and put it on. He touched the brim toward Clara and then toward Eli. He left like a man who understands that some work is loud and some is not. The house settled into its night shape. Belle snuffed the lamp in the front room and left the one in the kitchen turned low. The light made a gold circle on wood that had seen better days and worse. Eli stood and felt the pull in his side. It was there, but it did not lead. He shrugged into a clean shirt. The fabric caught on the bandage and then learned its place. Clara stepped onto the porch and sat on the top stair. The yard lay quiet under the cottonwoods. The leaves showed their light sides and turned back again. Juniper nicked in the dark where the fence cut across the moonlight. The sound settled her more than any word could. Eli eased down beside her, careful of the arm. He set the watch on his knee and let it tick to the night's measure. He looked at his hands in the low light. The fingers were clean. The nails had pink in them again. The small tremor slept. Clara took a long breath and let it out as a line of sound. Not words at first, only the shape of the tune that had kept her together at a fence and in a mill and under a bridge. She found the words and spoke them quiet. "I am a poor wayfaring stranger." The song filled the empty places in the porch rail, and the yard took it without argument. Eli listened. He did not sing. He did not need to. When she finished, they sat without speech. The cottonwoods worked the air. A far dog barked twice and quit. Nathaniel stood inside with Belle at the table, two silhouettes in a square of yellow heads bent toward paper. The clock in the hall lifted its voice every half-minute with a tick that did not falter. Eli closed his watch and pocketed it. The click sounded clear in the soft. He put his hand on his knee and felt the weight of the small metal circle that had marked so much and asked for nothing. He looked at Clara. She met his eyes and held them, and then looked back into the yard. They sat until the porch boards warmed to their bodies and cooled again. A train called far off, and the sound reached them as a thin line. The town made night noises that had nothing to do with guns. Belle's roof took the small shift of a breeze and remembered storms and summers that had walked past. The night did what nights do when houses are full and people have found places to set their hands. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.